Because regardless of how you feel about casual sex, we live in a culture in which sex precedes commitment. So the way to get to commitment and to long-term relationships and engagement and marriage, if that's what you're looking for, is kind of through sex. It's the first step of a process that can potentially end in children and family.
Dr. Orion Taraban, can you give me the macro picture as it relates to the work that you do? When I say the macro picture, I mean like what is going on in the world now that is so interesting and important for us to understand before we start talking about the relationship dynamics that we're going to talk about? What is that sort of macro picture at the moment? And how has that changed and changing?
I think probably big picture, the most salient thing in the world is the relationship crisis that we're working through. And it is a crisis. In the last 10 years, all kinds of relationships are being transacted less frequently. Fewer people are getting married at this country. I think in the most recent year in which statistics are available, it's at historic lows. It has never been this low before in the history of America. Fewer people are entering into relationships. Half the world's population lives in countries below reproductive rates, replacement rates. America would also be one of those countries if it weren't for its immigration. Like, its actual citizenry isn't reproducing enough to replace its own population, but that's obscured by immigration.
Really?
Yeah. Fewer people are even hooking up anymore. Like, there's fewer even casual sexual relationships being transacted, which is somewhat surprising.
When you say fewer people are hooking up and there's fewer transactional sexual relationships, versus when? Versus like the 1950s or?
Versus certainly 1970.
Okay.
So when the pill became widely available, there was predictably an explosion in casual sex relationships. We know that for both men and women, the number of lifetime sexual partners went up significantly. And we see that that's much lower these days. And that's kind of a problem because regardless of how you feel about casual sex, we live in a culture in which sex precedes commitment. So the way to get to commitment and to long-term relationships and engagement and marriage, if that's what you're looking for, is kind of through sex. It's the first step of a process that can potentially end in children and family. So there are important downstream consequences in a culture where sex precedes commitment when there is less casual sex being transacted.